What's up, you guys? Welcome back to the YBA. Now, over the years, I have been teaching for probably more than 15 years. I've accumulated a lot of knowledge about how to explain this properly so that you will actually have success when you go to do this. How many times are you going to fall flat when you watch somebody else do it? They make it look easy because they know it. But I also know what to tell you, what not to tell you to help you actually get a good result. If I just show you everything I'm doing, you're going to run in there thinking you're me. You're going to put lines in that you can't remove. You're going to have your machine set up incorrectly. Like, all this stuff needs to be addressed before you go forward. And that's why we're going to break this down. I'm going to tell you guys all the fade scales, the triangles, how all of it just fits together. And you're going to have a firm understanding after you watch this video. If you do not know how to fade, by the time you reach the end of this video, drop a comment and tell me, what the f did I miss? It's time for some fade scaling. And if you're not a barber, if you are not in this business, if you are just a casual kind of passerby, maybe want to cut your kid's hair, like, this ain't for you. This ain't for you. This one here is for the barbers. So don't leave a comment down below bitching about how, oh my God, that was so thorough. Like, that's not what I'm looking for. Go look at somebody else's shit. This is the WBbarber Academy. But I want to shout out to my sponsors. So if at the end of this video you choose to buy anything from Stylecraft or Gamma, you guys can use the code Eddie. You will save 15%. And for anything else, you guys can go to Williamsport Barber Supply, use the code Eddie10, and you guys will save 10% off anything that you want to purchase outside of Gamma and Stylecraft. So we're going to be doing some writing today. I really would encourage you guys to do this with me. Follow along in this exercise that'll help lock it in a little bit further. So get yourself a pencil, a piece of paper, and yeah, follow along. F, find out what the client wants. Be thorough, ask questions, use pictures, leave no room for any type of miscommunication. A, analyze and adapt. So what we're doing here is we're combing through the hair. We're looking for any funny growth patterns, colics, or any potential issues. Thin spots, thick spots, all of this stuff needs to be addressed before you start cutting. Because the last thing you want to do is cut into a section and realize, oh my God, there's a terrible colic here, and now his hair is going to stick up, and you've already messed up. D, deploy the 6 phases. So that's what we're about to break down today. I'm going to explain all 6 of the phases, and I'm going to break down some really helpful different charts and diagrams that are going to help you understand how your clippers, how your guards, how everything functions together, and how important it probably is to have at least 2 trimmers and 2 clippers at a bare minimum. E is for evaluate. So now we've already done our haircut. Everything is starting to look good, and we're going to evaluate every single thing about the haircut. We're going to check it from both sides. Are the sideburns even? Is the fade properly proportionate? Is it cut properly on top? Let's say you're about to write a book, right? And you just submit your first rough draft to the publisher. He's going to be like, what the hell is this? This is garbage, right? So for us, we want to submit our final draft to our client. So let's go ahead and make sure that we do everything we can before we hand them the mirror. That's evaluate. F-A-D-E-D. Faded. That's the acronym. And D stands for deliver a world-class service. That means addressing the client's needs, listening to what he has to say, talking about conversation that he will find interesting, and making sure that you're addressing every single thing that they need, whether it is actually on the haircut, whether it is kind of emotional, whether it is whatever. Just be that person that's there for your clients. Don't be wearing headphones. Don't do stupid shit. Like, actually focus on the client and deliver a world-class service. Customer service is one of these funny things that everybody thinks they know. They know so much about it, because if I ask any barber out here in the world, I say, excuse me, sir, do you feel you provide good customer service? Every one of them are going to say yes. But is that the reality? No, it's not. Actually, customer service in the barbershop f***ing sucks. And I'm going to tell you, if you guys are exercising some half-decent customer service, you're probably going to be 80% better than 90% of the barbers that are out there. Do that math. All right, let's get started with some of these charts. So a lot of you guys are probably wondering, should I be fading up or should I be fading down? So let me address this. Up faders, they like to look down on everybody else. They have royalty in their bloodlines, and they treat everybody else like a peasant. And the down faders, the dredges of society, you can always spot a down fader by their lack of effort. They take life as it comes, and they don't want to make too much work for themselves. Obviously, I'm just joking, all right? So let's not get carried away here. But the answer is actually in between these two, and I'm going to explain why. If this was a person's head, the goal would be to create a fade that blends up. It could come over here or whatever, but gradually it gets longer, right? So towards the top of this triangle, we could actually say that this is a number 2 in length. And below that, we could call that a 1.5 open. Please follow along, do this chart, because we're going to do another chart just beside it, and it's all going to plug in and make sense in a second. So 1.5 open, and below that, 1.5 closed. Here, 1 open, 1 closed. Here, half open. Here, half closed. Open, closed. Trimmer. And then down here somewhere, it will be skin. So, as you can see, one little step at a time, gradually, it's coming off the side of the head. And if you look at this part of the line, see how it's nice and straight? Well, that indicates that you've actually hit all these lengths and you've created a good blend. Now, if your line on the side of the head, this is like I'm zoomed in to this part of the head right here. I'm like creating that little triangle. If you look at that side of the head and it looks like this on a microscope, that's a fade with some lines in it. That's somebody who didn't hit their lengths. That's somebody who is amateur hours. And we're going to fix that today, so don't worry if you are. Don't worry if you have created lines. I really feel like when you get really good at cutting hair, I'm talking about when you start to really understand it and you lock it in, lines are not really something that you're going to battle with. You're going to battle with dark spots, and we're going to cover that plenty in one of these future chapters in this video. Shout out to you guys for being members. I really appreciate y'all. The membership is growing. Eddie's Army is taking over, and you guys are going to be getting some of the best education possible. The more members we get, the harder I can work on these videos, and the more effort I can put into them. We're going to make another circle right beside our other one here. And this is going to be the best circle I've ever made. Don't worry if your circle ain't perfect, y'all. I'm going to create my situation now. Hope y'all are ready. All right, here we go. So, client walks in. He says, I want my head shaved with a number 2. Can we all do it? Can anybody watching this video right now tell me, honestly, look me in the face and say, you can't slap a number 2 on a clipper and shave somebody's head? You be a damn liar. So let's do it. Number 2. I'm going to put a line there, but let's just assume that we shaved the whole damn thing. All right? What can I take into a number 2 that's not going to create any issues for me? We're going to put a 1.5. I actually have the tight guards from Gamma. Much easier to blend with than many other guards. And I'm going to put this into the open position. So that's open, and that's closed. And for anybody who's really new to this, when I have this closed, that's going to cut close as possible. When I have this open, that's going to leave the hair longer. And you'll always know the difference because the teeth, the cutting teeth, are getting away from the comb teeth. And more on this a little bit later. But 1.5 in the open position, if I was to shave underneath the head, and I stopped right before I got to the top, that's not going to create a line. 1.5 open. All right? Now, if I go up underneath, and this is in theory, y'all. This is the theory here. If I go up underneath with my 1.5 in the closed position, I'm also not going to create a line. Now, what can I do from here to here? Truth is, there's going to be some differences, and there is going to be some things that we're going to have to do in between these lines. We're going to get into that in a few minutes, but I want you to understand how everything works together. So at the end of your haircut, you're like I can't tell you how many times at the end of a class, people are coming over to me, they're like, hey, everything looks good except for I got this one little spot. I don't know what to get it out. Do you think it's a number 1? Do you think it's a number 2? I'm not going to come over your shoulder and be able to fix every one of your haircuts. You have to be able to self-diagnose. That's what this is about. So look, if it ain't the one, the only thing you could do is go lower, right? So you see this chart and you understand it's either the problem is above you or the problem is below you. But this is your chart. This is going to be the thing that you're going to use to understand where the problem is. So once again, the client says, you know what? I'd like to keep the length you have on top. I'd like you to, cut the sides a little bit lower. So what could I take into that 1.5 close in theory without creating an issue? And the answer is a 1 in the open position. Now here's where things get interesting. Actually, I will take into the 1 open. If I close the number 1, that's not going to create a line either. What can I take into that? We're going to call that a half open. Funny thing about that is a half open is actually longer than a 1 close. So let me bring up my clipper triangle. This triangle has all the lengths. It has them in millimeters. It has them in fractions. And it just makes everything easy to understand. We have the 0.5 open. The 0.5 can also be referred to as a half guard. It could also be referred to as a 1/16. Some systems call it a 0. In fact, Gamma calls it a 0 for the dubs, but we're actually calling it the half guard tight for the tight guards. So, and these are magnetic, so they should be able to stick to this board for the most part. So, all right, here we go. Next one. We have 0.5 open, 0.5 closed. Now it's just going to be open, closed, and then we have our trimmer, which the trimmer actually is going to cut to 0.12 millimeters. So now we go down to skin with our electric shaver. Now I hope that you guys have built both of these, the triangle and the circle, alongside of each other, and now you can sort of understand how everything is working together. However, down here, right here, between the one all the way down to the skin, this is where we're going to focus on next. Actually, all the steps are the same. It becomes really easy to do once you understand it, but theoretically, this should work. But actually, a closed taper doesn't always just remove the trimmer. The open taper doesn't always blend into the file. You're going to have some issues down here, so don't worry about it. We're going to get into this. So let me erase this board, and let's break this down a little bit further. But you will have zero success. I'm being dead serious about this if you don't understand this next little factor. So let's break this down. I think you guys are really going to enjoy this part of the lesson, because this is when a lot of things are about to start to hit home. Why do so many barbers that you see on Instagram, YouTube, or whatever else you watch, why do they have so many clippers? Do you think we just like buying a whole bunch of clippers? We just like maintaining a whole bunch of clippers, charging them, and doing all right. In all honesty, I'm a little bit of a clipper head, so I do sort of enjoy those things. But the truth is, we do this for a reason. So let's break this down here. We have we'll call this 0.5 open. And down here, we're probably going to use either a trimmer, maybe a closed taper. And below that, we're going to have skin. Here's why you're going to probably want a couple different units. If I choose to put my line in with this trimmer, it's going to be really difficult to get it out, because I have this thing set to cut wood. I have it set super close. And if you need to know about zero gapping, you guys can check out this video right here. I've pretty much showed how to do it on every machine. And this machine, I did an anti-gap. I moved it back. I don't want it to cut too close. And this is going to be a big advantage, and I'm going to explain why. If I was to put in my trimmer line with this one, I'd be having a hard time getting it out, and I'd probably wind up having to use this to get it out. If I was to put in my trimmer line with this one, it's going to be a much softer line, much closer to the step above it. What is the step above this? So let's fill those out real quick. So we have open taper, and we have closed taper. So each one of these steps, and then open taper, should actually fade into a 0.5 closed pretty easy. Have the right clipper. So if the next set above this is actually a closed taper, that means that I need to have the clipper set as close as possible to the trimmer in order to remove that line. So let's break down some blades real quick. First blade, taper blade, not going to remove the line. It's not going to be able to cut close enough. It's going to provide a really soft cut above this, and the taper blade is also going to really help me make a nice connection between the open taper and the half guard. And anytime I put a guard on here and I'm flicking and flicking, which we're going to get into manipulation, I'm going to break that down to a science in a few minutes here. But we're going to get into all that. But the taper blade is not the blade for this. So we got down to two more blades, okay? We have one that is a fade blade and one that is a vapor blade. So in the beginning, there was only a taper and there was only a fade blade. And then now with Gamma, what they've done is they created something called a vapor blade. What you'll see here is these are ridges. These are going to help you. This is going to help give you the best of both worlds between your taper blade and between your fade blade. However, if that line was put in super harsh, one of these needs to be set up really close. It needs to be zero gapped. The other one does not, because that's actually going to help me down the road above this area. But just for this area, I need one that cuts really close. So the one that I have the fade blade on might actually be the one that helps remove this trimmer line. With that being said, I hope you can start to see how when you set this in with a really harsh trimmer, the reason why you're not getting it out easily, the reason why you're seeing lines in your haircut, which a good barber who understands how to cut hair should never really be fighting lines. You should always know how to get rid of a line. It's dark spots. Dark spots are honestly the biggest challenge that good barbers are going to face. So let's help you understand how to get there, and that you're going to probably need 2 trimmers, 2 clippers. 1 trimmer, it's set back, it's soft, it's easy to use on the neck. You can use it on kids. You can set in your skin lines with it. This works both ways. You can also come up with it because you know that's not going to cut as close as your other trimmer. And you need one that hits like laser lines. We're going to line up the front with it. We're going to use it in emergency situations, which we're going to get into a little bit further into this haircut. And you could use it for just pretty much all around creating sharp lines. Now your clippers are no different than your trimmers. You need one that's set really close. You're going to be using it for removing those harsh skin lines. No matter what you do, no matter how good you are, at a certain point, you're going to have to remove a line that's harder than you expect to. So that's when, even if we're using guards, I'm probably going to want to grab the one that has the set as close as possible. So with that being said, I'm setting myself up to make this easier. And when I get to a certain point in the blend, when all the hard work is done, this area is taken care of, a taper blade is really hard to beat. It's going to provide a very soft cut, and it's going to be a little bit easier to do some of the clipper manipulations that we're going to get into here a little bit later. Let's break down a good way to actually do the blend, and in so doing, I will explain some of the manipulations and some of the ways that you should be thinking about holding your clipper during the process. All we're doing in phase 1 is bulk removal, and we're setting ourselves up for success down the road. And it's incredibly important that we do this in the right way, so let's talk about it. Client walks in. They might want to leave their hair long on top. They might want to cut it short on top. So let's address that. Client walks in, says, I want a number 2 on top. We handle that in phase 1. Client walks in, says, I want scissors on top. I want to leave it longer. There's an entire phase dedicated to that. It's phase 3. We're going to break that down a little bit later in the video. With that being said, all I'm looking to do at this phase in the haircut is remove bulk and set myself up to make my blend as easy as possible. What I'm going to encourage you guys to do to start this haircut, many of you guys who are new, grab a clipper, put it in the closed position, and we're going to set our first line in with that. With putting that line in with the closed taper, it's going to be very easy for you to remove it because all you're going to have to do is literally move this up 1 click at a time. And the Stylecraft and Gamma clippers, they all have clicks that help you seat right down so you know exactly where you're at. So you could literally click this up 1 click at a time. Now, when we're setting in guidelines, we always want to make sure that we try to hold our blade horizontal. I'm trying to keep it, kind of straight because I want to make a nice straight line. I want to make sure that I'm setting things up to be proportionate. However, the moment I begin blending, and I mean the moment I begin blending, I want to make sure that I have my clipper somewhat on an angle. I want to make sure that I'm going to be tipping, and flicking. So we'll get into that in a minute, but first let's handle the basics. I would encourage most of you guys to put this in with a closed taper. Now what that means is we could take our soft set trimmer afterwards, we can go up underneath it and we can flick off. There's not a big difference between my soft set trimmer and my closed taper. I'm going to take my trimmer as close to that line as possible, and I'm going to start to flick up and away. If I make a mistake at some point and I go a little bit higher here, it's okay. We're still going to be able to handle that. Our clipper should be able to remove that, but the idea is not to create a situation where we're going to have issues. Below that, I'm going to be using my shaver. I got the Uno 2.0, and honestly, when I get close to this line, if you're a beginner, a single foil shaver is going to be really easy because it's not going to take a whole bunch of hair. You can really see it work, and I feel like it's just super easy to manipulate. You can keep this on a corner. When you get to it, there's a couple different moves we're going to make with the electric shaver. 1 is just against the grain. That's just bulk removal. 2 is down with the grain. That's blending. That's going to make it a little bit easier. And 3, we kind of just work it back and forth on the corner. 4, we might tap into the line and come down. So a combination of one of those things is going to usually create a nice smooth blend between skin and closed taper. And once we got that, y'all, it's going to be super, super easy. So let's say your client walks in, though, and they got a pile of hair, and we're not able to just take a closed taper and make an accurate line. Then obviously we got to remove the bulk some other way. So if you haven't done so in your haircut, let's talk about that right now. Now, another thing we really want to pay attention to is exactly what the client wants. Do they want kind of a higher fade? Most of the time, you got to really want to try to keep this a little bit heavier right here. This is called the parietal ridge. If I put a comb alongside the head, right where it leaves the scalp, that's the parietal ridge. Anything above that, it gets cut short, That could make us look like we got a mohawk. That could push our hair in right here. It makes our head look funny in shape. So we really probably want to preserve that area. So in order to put this line in, even if I don't know exactly what the client wants, I'm going to just take a number 2 and I'm going to do a little scooping motion. With my number 2 on, I'm trying to get the blade flat towards the very bottom, and then I'm going to lift off and away. This is called the C motion. This is going to be one of the first clipper manipulations that we do. We don't really care too much about the rest of the blend at this moment in the haircut. You'll probably see me coming down with my comb, feeding the comb. I'm doing that to prevent the clipper from cutting any higher than this because I don't know if there's a colic or what the client might want yet. So at this point, I'm checking out the landscape, and all I'm really trying to do is touch it flat to this area so that I could put in my closed taper line. So pretty much my entire system that you're about to learn is predicated on the fact that when we're above our number 2 in length, most of the time, not all of the time, but most of the time, when we're above our number 2 in length, we're going to move into our phase 2, and we're going to use clipper over comb or shear over comb to handle any type of blending into the top. Now, that's different. If the client says he wants a 4 on top, we might use guards. Something like that might make sense to use guards. However, clipper over comb is going to be faster. It's going to help you make more money, and it's going to be more accurate. Before we go any further, once I've put in my skin line, I've reduced the bulk off the sides, and I've used my electric shaver, I've set myself up for success. That is the end of phase 1. I really feel like everybody sitting out there right now watching, you guys can execute a perfect phase 1. So how do I know if I've done a good phase 1? 1, it's proportionate on both sides with that closed taper. 2, you successfully went underneath with the trimmer and you didn't create another line. And 3, you were able to go underneath with the electric shaver and get everything balded off and ready to go forward. Now, if that's all done, you're going to see that there is no line between your skin all the way to your closed taper. And you may have removed the bulk off of the sides. To do that, that's fine. So that's part of the debulking process. And if the client asks you for like a 4, a 5, or any clipper guard on top, you would have, of course, handled this during the phase 1 step. So assuming this is all done correctly, we're going to move on to phase 2, which is actually clipper over comb. I'm going to give you some pointers on this, but I do have an entire video on this. Then we will move to phase 3, which is cutting the top. Now we know where we started from and we know where we're going to, so we need to blend that in, and that's phase 4. Welcome to phase 2. So one of the reasons why I put phase 2 right after phase 1, we've completed all the debulking, we've set ourselves up for the fade, everything is ready there. Now, usually I would like to cut the top before I do the blend. So in between those 2 steps, I put phase 2 for clipper over comb, because if I am going to cut the top, I can cut some of the area around the back and sides, and that's going to save me time, minimizing the amount of scissor work I'm going to have to do on top. So let's start with holding the comb the right way. A lot of you guys are holding the comb like this. I've actually seen a lot of really accomplished barbers doing this too. But what this does is this reduces the range of motion I can actually get. So I would like to see you actually pinch the comb. The other thing about the comb is you want to make sure that the teeth are wide enough to easily get hair into. Some clipper combs just have way too many teeth and they make it really hard to lift up the section. The wide ones, the Zuka ones, those are actually like my favorite. They're flexible, they're wide, they're skinny, and that brings me to the next point. If I was to just push this up against the side of the head and cut all the hair that's stuck out from the comb, you need to know what that length of your comb is. Now, these are like wall clipper cutting combs. A lot of combs are going to be like around a 1.5 in length, maybe a 1 open or so. So we want to know what the launch point is. And that's why I pretty much base my fade system off of skin to a number 2, and then 2 and up, we're going to use clipper over comb for. So I can get the majority of the blend done. It doesn't mean I won't use guards. It just is the system that I like to use. So once we're holding our comb the right way, we pinch it from the side, you're going to have about 180 degrees of motion. You'll be able to get in there. So the next part about this is, how do we want to hold our clipper? Well, when we're working on the lower part of the head, we can hold the handshake grip. So if me and you were shaking hands, it would be like this. And then we're going to bring the clipper across the comb. You can just set it in there on the angle, tip it out, and cut. It doesn't have to be perfect. Less is more. We're going to take a little bit at a time. We're going to evaluate. Take some, look at it. Take some, look at it. You can come from the top and work your way down. You can come from the bottom and work your way up. Neither of these things matter. Once we get above the parietal ridge, if I take a comb, I put it flat on the head, right where it leaves the hair, That's the parietal ridge. You're going to notice it's going to be pretty uncomfortable to try to use the handshake grip. So we're going to switch to the pencil grip. And now I'm going to begin lifting and cutting. One of the reasons why we lift and cut, that's just reducing the bulk, removing some weight, and each time I'm going to comb it back down into place. So think about it this way. Roll, cut, reset. Roll, cut, reset. And keep that in mind, because when we do this with the shears, it's going to be the exact same thing. So where do we want to focus on our comb? Well, the hair that's at the very back of the comb, the bottom of the comb, that hair is the hair that we want to cut. That's the hair that's actually being directed out to 90 degrees with no tension. So that's kind of the goal. And we want to be careful that we don't slide the bottom of that clipper blade off the back of that comb and wind up cutting a notch into somebody's hair. This is supposed to be efficient. So one of the things I noticed a lot of students doing is they would rush. They would move really quick because they see me moving quick, or they see others who have mastered this moving quick. You don't have to move fast to do clipper over comb. You can literally move super slow. In fact, in the beginning, I would encourage you to move slow and then evaluate each little step. So if you just wanted to taper somebody's sideburns out, you could literally hold this flat, tip it this way, and now we can move the clipper kind of horizontally up the comb. So we could literally just do it just like this, and that's going to make little differences. That's going to really help you get your blend, especially when you're doing it into really long hair on top. There's nothing like clipper over comb for that, or shear over comb for that matter. So let's talk about the shears for a second. I never really showed you guys how to hold them yet in the phase 3. I know I didn't mention it. So we're going to take a ring finger, put it in here. And then our goal here with shear over comb is to just move the thumb. So that's all I really want to move. And by doing that, you'll notice that the back blade stays really still. That's what we want to do, because we want to be able to build that accuracy. So now when we have it on the comb, we want to put it right towards the very bottom of the comb, the only hair that's being held out at 90 degrees, and we're going to cut. Now this is not going to remove a ton of bulk unless you really wanted to. You can. But the idea here is to lift, comb, reset. So especially when we're blending with this, we're going to comb, cut. We're going to move up the head, cut, roll down, reset. So we're just rolling the comb out towards us, and we're cutting down. Now, rolling the comb out can actually cause you problems too. You never want to make a cut when you're down here. You never want to make a cut when you're upside down, because that's just going to cut a big line into the hair. So our goal is actually to just follow the shape of the scalp in that 90 degrees. So that means that when we're up here, we're actually tipping the comb in. And you have to pay attention to your client's growth patterns. So that's a little bit. There's a full video on shear over comb and clipper over comb, and I would encourage you guys to check that out. So let's head into phase 3. Let's learn how to cut the top the right way. This is phase 3, how to cut the top. So if I was going to look at the very top of somebody's hair, I'm gonna look at that top section real quick, and I'm gonna throw out some basics here. Everybody feels like they got to be so advanced, man. Like if it's your day 1 in the shop, if it's your day 30, even if you've been in there for a year, man, like you don't have to dive into the most advanced stuff in the face of the earth. Like the basics are fine. They've been used for generations, and they're going to work fine for you. So I'm going to show you guys a very easy, basic way to cut the top. Remind you, we're looking at the very top of somebody's head, and I'm going to usually section out the bang section. So we'll just say that this is their nose. All right, so this is the bang or fringe section. And below that, I'm going to create a section no wider than the width of my comb right here. And I'm going to bring it out and I'm going to cut it. So that's called a mohawk section. Now, remember, that's their nose. I'm going to section out the hair beside it. And I'm really only concerned with going up to my second knuckle. So that might mean that I only get to about right here. So now that section matches this section. I will take another section, no wider than the width of my comb. And I'm really only focused on this area. I'm going to continue this until my guide has extended here, here, and it is this wide now. Now I can jump over to this side, and I'll do the same thing. I'll pick up that little section from the middle, and I'll move over. Now what you're actually going to be doing here is you're going to be working with 2 different guidelines. One is that Mohawk guideline. That's called the stationary guideline. We can always go back to that. We can always find that. And the other is a traveling guideline, because as I pick up these sections and I move back with them, there's going to be a little bit of the hair in the previous section that I'm going to be able to see. So I'm going to be able to get this guide to get this wide. The only principle I really need to adhere to is I need to make sure that I'm actually holding it to 90 degrees. And 90 degrees just means that I'm holding it straight out from where it grows. That's why it was important in barber school. When you guys learned how to section, when some of you guys were there like, I don't want to cut women's hair. That's so stupid. What you need to do is understand where the hair grows from. And that's what you learn by sectioning and cutting long hair. Where does it grow from and how do I direct it out to the right area? So that's what we got to do here. We're going to direct it out to 90 degrees. And essentially 90 degrees is going to be like the same shape as my scalp. So if I had this here, you're going to see that 90 degrees is the same shape as the scalp. So if I do this correctly, it's going to be really easy. So if I do this correctly, I'm going to be able to walk this guy right down the sides. It's going to be very easy. Now, mind you, you stay put. Don't do it, Wilson. All right, so the nose is right here, remind you. So I was cutting, going back in sections like this, and I'm standing and I'm cutting horizontally. If my sections get too wide, I could wind up creating a bunch of lines going back. I don't want to do that either. So no matter what I do, I want to make sure that I keep my sections thin. I got them with the width of my comb. And if I've cut horizontally, another thing you learn when you're a cosmetologist and when you're cutting longer hair, if I cut horizontally, I'm going to do a cross check. And I'm going to do a cross check vertically. So now I'm going to hold up my hair this way. And don't be surprised if you see some varying degrees of length. One of the things that I think a lot of you guys have trouble understanding is if my section is too big. Let's say I pick up hair all the way from here and I direct it out to 90 degrees and here. And that's a really big section. The only hair inside of that section that's being cut to 90 degrees, you can hold big sections if you understand where the hair grows from. The only hair inside of that section that's being cut to 90 degrees is here. So when I have over-directed hair all the way down here to be cut here, when it comes back, guess what? It's going to be longer. It's going to be much longer, right? And we can use that to our advantage. Let's say the client wants to keep the top, the very front, a little bit longer. I could actually pick up hair in the front and direct it all the way back to the middle of the head and cut it. And guess what's going to happen? It's going to wind up to be longer in the front once I'm done. So how do I handle the front? It's actually pretty easy. Let's say that this is your client's eyes and the hair is coming down, in their eyes, right? We decide to cut wherever we want. Let's just say we decided to cut right there. Boom. We've cut the hair and we got a good zero line. We've combed it straight forward and we've cut it across. Now we got a good zero line. And we've already cut our interior using the method I explained, but we left out that top part. Now, all we're going to do is we're going to connect the interior to the exterior. So the difference is when I pick this hair up into my section, let's look at it from the side. This is a side view. This is the nose. And when I pick this hair up that I've already decided I like the length. When I pick this hair up and I see all these other short hairs beside it, usually it's going to look something like this. Right? I pick that hair up. All I have to do is look at where my 90-degree length was. This is right where I left off. And all I have to do is connect this to this. Now that might mean that I take my comb and I have to tip it outwards. Sometimes it'll just be straight and I won't have to do a whole lot. Sometimes the bangs will be even shorter than that. So if I have to do all that, I just have to look at what the client wants and I just have to blend my interior length to the exterior length. And I'll do that with pie sections, each one no wider than the width of my comb moving up the side of the head. So for the most part, this very basic technique is going to get you by. However, there are 4 different kind of parts that you can use for this. You guys can check out the blunt cut, the long layer, the graduated, and the other 90-degree that is in the membership tab. And you guys can check those out. And I would encourage you guys to get a mannequin and practice this stuff because unlike fading and some of the other techniques, when we actually do scissor work on mannequins, we can actually build our skill set there. And it's a lot easier to do it there than, trying it your very first time on a client. Let's jump into phase 4, the blend. How do we actually do it? What is the theory behind it? And what is every single thing that I need to know? Okay, so quickly, let's do a recap before we go into phase 4 and we complete the blend. I want to remind you guys that we finished off a perfect phase 1. So we've already run our electric shaver, we used our trimmer under that, and initially we set our guideline in with the clipper in the closed position. Now we've got our clipper over comb done and we already have our top cut. So all we're really doing now is we're connecting the bottom into the top. So let's start out there. We'll put our first guideline in. So we set another guideline in. We actually want these to be about the width of your finger. And this is actually going to be our open taper guideline. Whenever I do this, I typically don't mess with this line for a while. This is going to be the last thing I get out. Between my closed taper and my open taper, this is going to be that little tricky area that we're going to have to work a little bit harder for. but it's also going to be difficult to blend that number 2. Some clients, like my hair is a bastard to get this part of the blend. You'll fade out my line, no problem, but have fun with the top because it's going to be really difficult to blend that in. So with that being said, I like to just ignore this part after I put in this line. I've created my guideline. It's nice and straight. I'm happy with it. And if you want to make your life a little bit easier, a good tool to actually put that guideline in with would actually be the taper blade. So I could actually come up, soften my blend, and I'm creating less work for myself in this step by not jamming it into the head and holding it flat. If you're a beginner, jam it into the head and hold it flat. It's okay. If you feel a little bit comfortable doing this, I really think you should, because this is going to help soften the guideline. And this is going to help reduce the work that we're going to do going forward. So with that being said, the next step that I can do is I can actually take that 1.5 open, and I could just go ahead and create my last connection into the 2. So the 1.5 open, you'll notice that it's actually going to wind up dissipating this area a little bit. You're going to start to see that there's not going to be that much to blend. Close it, the 1.5 closed, and all of a sudden, you've got a really nice connection into that number 2 area. So if I take away this 2, and I just say that we now have it blended properly to the 1.5 closed, then that means there's really only a couple of steps that we have to do in here. We're going to skip the half guard at all costs. I don't want to use the half guard until I absolutely have to, because the half guard actually has some overlap in it. For instance, an open taper, that leaves the hair longer than a half guard closed. For instance, a closed 1 guard actually cuts closer than a half open. So I want you guys to understand that. It's not important that you do 100%, but I do want you to understand that if you pick up your half guard and you go charge it into your haircut, I guarantee you it's going to cause you issues. You want to use it sparingly towards the end as a detailing tool, and we're going to get to that. We had the open taper. We're cool there. So what is the step when we did our circle? What is the step that we can take into a 1.5 close? Answer: 1 in the open position is not going to create a line. So if we do a 1 open, 1 closed, we're going to be able to make a nice blend probably into that section. Now, it is time that we talk about the blending. The moment we begin closing clippers, notice how that's the first one that I've closed. The moment we begin closing clippers, there's 2 ways to do it. 1, we can start at the top and we can go 1 click at a time, and we can work very close to where we were with that 1 open. Click it down, 1 click at a time. Notice how it's on an angle. Notice how it's kind of sideways, and we can go all the way until we have it in the fully closed position. That's fading from the top down. In some situations, it makes sense. In fact, whenever I'm at the end of my haircut and I'm detailing and I'm trying to figure out, like, okay, how do I get this section a little better? How do I get rid of some of these dark spots? How do I make this all line up better? In that case, I'm not going to come from the bottom and go up. I don't want to create a line. I'm trying to reduce dark spots. So I'm always going to start from the top and work my way down in those scenarios. So in this scenario, I think it does make a lot of sense to start from the top and work my way down. Or if you want, you can go at the top of your open taper line. You can take it on the corner, close it all the way, and we could just kind of run over the top of that line. Let's see how much that's going to dissipate. And then we can begin open it, and we can repeat that process. All right? So we're going to talk about some clipper manipulation before we show you the hardest part here is these last 2 parts. One of the things that we might do, we might lift the butt end of the clipper out. And typically this is done with the clipper in the open position. This is going to move the cutting blade further away from the scalp, and it's going to give us a little bit more leeway. We're not going to cut as close. So out here, it's going to leave the hair a little bit longer. We can also use just a corner and hold it out here, which is the lift, tip, and flick. So now, if I want to cut closer, let's say what I'm doing is not removing the line. I'm just going to start moving this ass end down until I get this blade almost completely flat. When I have it completely flat, that's when it's going to cut its absolute closest. So knowing that, we can use that to our advantage, and we can lower that handle as we need to. And when we have it completely flat, that's all we can do. Once it's completely flat, if it's not removing that line, then you got only one option. You know you got to move down a step. So whatever step you're on, just move down 1 step. How do we get out the most difficult part of the blend? Now that we've handled the 1 open, 1 closed, all we have left to do is this part. And because I've set myself up so easy here, I'm going to break this down as easy as it gets. So let me erase this board and let's break this down. We have our closed taper. So we know that it's perfect from skin to closed taper. We have the open taper. And we might have to do a little residual between that and the one closed because we skipped our half guard. Drop it in the comments if this is easy to follow. I know we're getting a little bit into the mud here, so I just want to make sure that this is as easy as possible to follow. So, similar to the way that we handled our number one, there's two ways that we could choose to attack this. Both ways are going to be essentially the same thing. So, now that we're dealing with the closed taper line, there's going to be a couple of things we're going to do differently. However, I would encourage you guys to grab the one with the taper blade because this is going to make this softer and easier. We're going to put it in the fully open position. That's where we just were, right? So if I put that in the fully open position, if I'm just using the corner, I could even poke above the open taper line without creating an issue. Now it's time to start the blend and start to reduce this area. I'm going to go one click at a time. One click, keeping it on a corner, staying just below where I went with that previous step. It's going to sort of look like this. I went one click, and I stayed just below where I was. I'll go one more click. Stay just below where I was. I'll go another click. Stay just below where I was. And that's the final click. I'm going to run over my closed taper line. There's a very good chance if I'm using my taper blade that this line doesn't come out on the bottom, but that's okay. I've set myself up for success here. Probably the rest of this is going to come out fine. If you see a dark spot, a taper blade is your friend. Using just a couple corners. The lift, tip, flick. That's what we're talking about here. If we're looking for dark spots, that's what we're doing. If we're looking to blend, it's lift, tip, flick. So in this case, we're here at first, we lower it down until it's flat, but no matter what, we're only using one or the other corner. And some people literally like to think of it like this, like you see these clipper teeth, when I'm blending, I'm really only trying to use like two, maybe three, even sometimes just one tooth of the clipper if it's a particularly difficult spot. You guys can do this either way. You can fade this up or you can fade this down. I really don't think there's a huge difference here, but if I wanted to fade it from the bottom going up, I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to click it one time. I'm still going to keep it on the corner. I'm going to move my way up one time, until I reach the open taper area. So let's talk about this area for a second, right here, the closed taper. Now, because I chose to use a taper blade here, I've made my life easier up here. In fact, my blend is so good that I'm going to put my half guard on, which we're going to show you how to do that properly in a second, but I'm going to put my half guard on and my blend is going to be done with. However, that's why I have my clipper that's set close. That's why I have one with a fade blade or a vapor blade on it. And now if I close that all the way, in all likelihood, I'm going to remove that line without an issue, as long as I'm lift, tip, and flick. And if I'm just using the corners here, I'm not going to have a problem. However, let's say that doesn't get it out, because sometimes that's what's going to happen. Now, I move down to my soft set trimmer. I got my soft set trimmer, and now I'm just using the corner to wipe that out. But what if that doesn't get it out? Now I'm going to move down to my harshest cutting trimmer yet, which is exactly why I have these things set up, and I hope that you guys are understanding how valuable it can be to use these tools to your advantage, to have them set up to your advantage. So now I'll use this one and watch it come right out like magic. But what if that doesn't get it out? Then we know we've done a poor job with our phase one. We probably should get a little better in our phase one. But if you have any struggles here, we've set ourselves up to get this out quite easily, especially by using a closed taper. However, that might happen to you, and it's okay if it does. This is when a single foil shaver, to me, becomes an absolute necessity, because if I use the double foil, I might wind up just knocking out a huge section, creating an issue. So I love having this single foil shaver, and I'm going to come and I'm going to tap down on the line, or I might even have to flick up. But because it's so small, I'm making very small adjustments. A big thing about using the corner, the lift, tip, and flick is when you do make mistakes, they're minimal. They're a very small mistake. They're not noticeable to the client. They're not really that visible. When you're being responsible and you're doing things to mitigate making mistakes, you're going to be a much more accomplished barber. Okay, so let's assume that that's out now. And all we have to do now is a little touch up with the half guard. And I'm going to show you guys what that usually looks like. So at the top of this, we have our closed number one. So in between the one closed and where we just finished off with our open taper, there's a little bit of darkness there. Sometimes it might not even be there at all. So this is when the taper blade becomes your friend again. And we're going to put a half guard on, and we're going to open it 2 clicks open. One of the reasons why this taper blade being set back a little bit and not being zero gapped is going to be helpful is because actually this open and closed is not going to be too much different than having this on with a fade blade. So you have a couple different options here. So one of the first things I'll do, slap it on the taper blade. I'm going to go 2 clicks open, and I'm going to do this from the top down now. If I go all the way open, remember, that's going to cut longer than a number 1, especially with the taper blade underneath it. It's going to be even longer than that. So I'm going to go 2 clicks close, 1, 2. I'm going to put it on a corner, and I'm going to see what that does. I'm going to work this all the way down until it's entirely closed. Now, because it's a taper blade, and I know I'm not going to make many mistakes with a taper blade, I can actually go back through with the taper blade by tipping it out a little bit away from the scalp and just using one of the corners to hit some of those dark spots and work some of them in. Now, if you don't have a taper blade, the process is going to look very similar with a fade blade. So we'll do the same thing. 1, 2 clicks, but it's very likely that you might cut a little more than you mean to when you have a fade blade on. So just be really careful, be mindful, lift it out away from the head, tip, flick. So one of the things we want to talk about is like, where's this clipper moving from? Like if I'm moving from my shoulder, I don't feel too good on my shoulder. Now if I'm moving from the bottom part of my arm only, well, that's okay. But the answer is kind of a little bit in the wrist. My arm is staying kind of still and slow, and I can also be anchored on the client here. I could even use my middle finger to kind of anchor if I feel a little bit shaky or something, and I can make it work like that. So eventually you're going to work out this issue with the half guard, and your phase 4 is over. So let's head into phase 5, and let's talk about the edge up. All right, you guys, there's definitely a whole bunch of little tricks that you can use to get the edge up looking right. I'm just going to go through some of the basics, okay? Anchoring and building consistency, those are very important things. You need to understand how to anchor. I do not want to see you sort of way away from your client with your arm outstretched, just taking stabs at the client. Like, how is that? This ain't beer pong. You ain't that, that's dumb. We want to make sure we got 3 points of contact on the client. We're holding their head. We can anticipate any movements for that. I'm not just establishing dominance over my client by putting my hand on the top of his head. No, I'm feeling if he's about to sneeze or if he decides to look down at his phone, like I'm getting feedback right there from that left hand, right? And it steadies me out a little bit. And then the other part is I'm going to take my fingers on my other hand and I'm going to find a place to anchor them on his scalp too. And then the third point of contact is going to be the actual blade touching. This helps me be very accurate. So another way I might do it is using a pencil grip. I got my hand on the top of his head, and I'm going to rest my wrist right here on the bridge of his nose. It's okay. Find somewhere to rest it. When I'm doing the C-cups, I'm going to use my middle finger, and I'm going to create a twist motion. You're going to find that for a lot of you guys who are right-handed, the right side of the head is going to be really easy for you to create that C-cup motion. The left side of the head is going to require something a little bit unnatural. So I'm actually going to do the same thing, but I'm using my middle finger, and I'm going to curve it this way, all right? And I might use two hands on the clipper. This is really, really trying to steady it out. So 2 hands are on the clipper. My middle finger is touching the client, and that's something I'll do sometimes. You'll see me take 2 hands, or you'll even see me take a finger and kind of steady that clipper out just a little bit. So those are a few different things that we can do to make sure that we're being accurate. So let's break down a quick little edge up, and let's show you guys, like I'm going to explain to you guys what I'm doing. I realize this isn't the greatest representation, but if he was standing to the side, you can sort of see the C cup, and you can sort of see how it comes down. So there's also a little thing I'm going to explain to you guys in the back of the neck. You ever do a taper and you look at the back of the neck and it looks like there's a nice defined line on one side, and on the other side it's just completely like blown out. There's a reason for that, and I'm going to explain that here in a few minutes. When we're in the front of the hairline, that's when we can pick up our trimmer that is set the closest. And for me, that's the instincts. So what we want to do here is we want to look for 2 things. We want to look for let's say the client's hairline actually looked like this. People come in, they're not perfect, all right? And one of the first things you want to notice is they're probably going to have a low side, and they're probably going to have a high side. I'm just going to put high. High. So they have a low side and they have a high side. So if I was to begin on the high side and push the high side even higher, I could wind up creating a serious ski slope. And we don't want to do that. So when I first look at that, let's go back to the acronym. What is the F and the A? We find out what the client wants. And then we analyze. So we're back to the analytical part. And in the very beginning of your haircut, you should have already recognized that he had a messed up edge up or that this might be a difficulty. And you should have already noticed that. And now we have made a plan for it. So, all right, here we go. We got the low side and we got the high side. So I'm always going to start about in the middle or on the low side. And I'm going to try my best to get it to match to the high side. I do want to preface this by saying you don't have to obsess over perfection with the edge up. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. These people on the internet can go fuck themselves. Who cares? It's between you and the client, what the client wants. If the client decides that he doesn't want his edge up pushed back because he's got a bad hairline, because a lot of people do, he doesn't want you to remove a ton of hair and watch it grow back 3 days later, and now he looks even worse. And you look bad too, by the way. You have to have that conversation with the client. If you got a client who's coming in every week, he might be able to get away with pushing his hair back or doing something a little bit different. But if your client is coming in every month, every 2 months, like you would be crazy to push him back like that because he's going to look bad in just a couple of days. I always recommend that we take as little out of the hairline as possible. Now anything that sticks out, you know, from the bang section or something like that, that might be handled differently. But I'm just saying, into the interior of the hairline, the actual area where it grows, take as little as possible. Let's break this down, and I'm going to explain to you guys a couple real tricky edge ups. Like, what if the client wanted to have all this hair long on top? Maybe he wears it forward, but once in a while he styles it back, so he wants to have a little bit of a lineup. What do we do there? Do we knock this down with a number one? I'm going to explain. So if it's the first time doing it for that client versus, you know, him just getting it cleaned up, cleaning up obviously is easy. You can see what the barber did before you, but when it's the very first time, what do we do in that situation?
All right, if you got hair this long, all right, and you gotta put them in so tight that you're pulling the scalp back, obviously when you do the edge up into that and you take it out, it's gonna just land wherever it wants. Tip number one, when you put your clips in, don't put them in too tight. Relieve some of the tension, but definitely get all those hairs back. Now, you remember back in barber school when you were like, I don't want to deal with long hair. I'm a barber. I just want to use clippers all day. Like, all right, yo, this is the time when you actually had to learn how to use a comb. You actually had to learn how to section. I've actually parted out a really nice portion of his edge up, mainly on one side. That was the lower side. The high side, I really didn't get that much of. And the way that I'm going to do that is using a number one, fully closed with the grain. I'm actually using my Rogue clippers, and I really do think that the Rogue combo is the best priced combo for the highest performing tools that you are going to find. If you guys want to use my code Eddie, you will save 15% off anything Stylecraft or Gamma. And if you're getting started, I don't think there is a better value than this. As you can see, we have some short hair now in there that we can do our edge up to. And this is not going to push the client back because we're just going to edge up as little as we possibly can. As I build my edge out to each side, using the mirror, making sure that I got all the hair, you're gonna notice that I still have a lot of hair on that left side of the head for whatever reason, because I told you, I sort of stopped mid-haircut and decided to start working on the edge. Now, a tool that a lot of you guys just completely flat out ignore, for whatever reason, is your shears. Some of you guys just don't wanna pick them up. And I'm telling you right now, when you have a bunch of little hairs sticking out, especially when you're dealing with hair this long, shears are gonna be one of your best friends. You can get right to them hairs that are sticking out. You can really square off the corners in the edge up, which is what you're gonna see me do. And then I'm gonna go in there with some trimmer over comb, where as you see, I'm just kind of lifting up some of them curls on the side of the head, and I'm using my comb to knock them off. All right, as we went forward, obviously, I finish up this blend. I will show you guys what it looks like towards the end, but as we go forward in this, I'm paying particular attention to this lineup. And one of the reasons why I think I wanted to do the lineup first was I didn't want to wipe out that hair. And while I seen it was still there, while I seen it was still thick, I could set my lines in and I could just leave them there. So when I'm arching around the sides in them C-cup areas, again, I'm just using my middle finger and I'm twisting it so it's being basically held in place on a circle by my middle finger right there. So that's one of the ways that I keep that consistency. Sometimes you'll see me do like a two-hand hold, and at a certain point during an edge up, it makes a lot of sense to pick up a pair of shears, which is what you'll see me do to kind of finalize that last bit of the line.
We're going to head back over to the phase 5. I just wanted to show you guys an edge up like this that might be a little bit more challenging when the hair comes in. It's super long and you got to build an edge up from scratch. I just wanted to show you what that process would look like for me. If you guys have a different way that you approach it, drop it in the comments. But let's move back over to the regular portion of the video. We're going to obviously move over to our low side until we got it matching the high side. And then we'll come back and we'll try our best to match up this side. So once we've done that, we need to handle these vertical bars. So the vertical bars are just the areas that come straight down. Now on this side, I got a pretty defined vertical bar. And on this side, it's always been faint. Like my entire life, it's been faint. And yes, I'm going bald now, so it's worse. But I've always had a little bit of a faint side. You're never going to be able to get this absolutely perfect. And I don't like when people wipe out my good side to try to make it match my bad side. So work with what the client has. We're going to put the trimmer in the pencil grip. And it's going to be very easy for you to find a nice place to rest it on the client's forehead. And then we're just going to kind of rake it back and forth. Now, just like we talked about with the lift tip flick, I want to point out something important here when it comes to trimmers. The moving blade is the area that could irritate the client's skin, right? So if I have this tipped out a little bit, I'm moving the moving blade further away. So if a client's like, that machine's a little sharp, you might not have to switch the machine out. You can just be a little bit more careful about how you approach the skin. Because if I have this tipped down now, I'm riding that moving blade right on the skin, and that's definitely going to cause some irritation in some cases. Usually across the forehead, most of the time, you're going to be okay. But every once in a while, that's going to cause irritation. So let's be mindful about how we're holding it. Just like with the clipper, I like to kind of maybe start with it a little bit lifted out, see what that does, and I can ease it on down, see how the client reacts, see if it's making the skin red, and I can see, if I can get away with that. But we also have our soft set trimmer. If we're dealing with a kid, we can always pick up the soft set trimmer and we'll be able to take care of that without an issue. And then we can just come back with the razor because we're going to have to do that in this phase anyways. This is half of the phase. We're going to do it with the razor. We're going to follow up. But the most important part really is with the trimmer. After a little bit of practice, anybody can learn how to use a razor and follow up a good line. So on this side, because you're right-handed, you're going to find that the client's left side is always going to be a little bit less natural. So you're going to either come across this way. It's kind of funny because I see 360 Jeezy. He just switches the trimmer altogether to this hand. I don't know why that's more comfortable for him, but whatever's comfortable for you is what you should be doing. I'll typically do it here, or I'll come to the top of the client and I'll reach around from this side. So whatever's comfortable for you to do that, but we're going to repeat the process. Now, we want to make sure that this is balanced. And obviously, if the client comes in with really clean hair, you might even do a steam towel in some situations to get it to lay forward, shampooed, everything like that. That's in a perfect world. But prior to them leaving, you need to make sure that you've stepped back. You've looked in the mirror. You've looked at it from every angle that you can, and you've made it the best that it can be before you let that client walk out. So that's pretty much that for the top of the hairline. I'm just going to explain to you guys the C-cups real quick. All I'm doing is I take my finger and I'll literally rock right around here. There are times where I'm going to take little tiny swipes at it little by little, but I've noticed that sometimes that can create kind of like a jagged finish, almost too texturized for my liking, where lately what I've been sort of experimenting, especially with the instincts, is they're so powerful. I'm able to take this and just try to make one arcing motion to start with. It's sort of like my rough draft, and then I'll go back with the little chops and kind of revise it. I've kind of noticed that if I can take one swoop, that first initial swoop, you'd be kind of surprised by how good it looks. And then I'm just going back and I'm just tapping it a little bit. So if your trimmer is cutting well, you guys can experiment with those two things. But most importantly, 3 points of contact, make sure we anchor. And now let's talk about the nape of the, let's go to the back and let's talk about the nape. So here's the situation, y'all. This is the back of a client's neck. And here is the line. We've made a nice taper. Everything looks good. And when we go to do our line, it looks something like that. This line comes in all distinct, and this line comes in like not very distinct. So what do? Do we keep cutting into the hairline where it's going to grow back and we know it's going to look bad, but we keep cutting into the hairline because we obsess over perfection? Or is there a way to avoid this altogether? Yes, there actually is. So in the analyze stage of the haircut, in the acronym, analyze. We looked at this already. We've made a plan around it, and you should have if you didn't. So the way that I would do this, if I look at somebody's neck, if I look in the nape and I see a bunch of different patterns going on. Most people have a colic right in the nape. A lot of people do. All right. There's going to be some kind of funny growth pattern around that area. And not everybody's a candidate for a taper, but that's neither here nor there. Sometimes you're going to see somebody with some jacked up stuff going on the back of their neck. And honestly, they can wear their hair a little bit longer there. They should cover that. But in the situation where it's avoidable, let me explain to you this. That same fade that we just did, if in the very beginning, if you were just doing a taper, in the very beginning, if you would have set in what I call a rainbow guideline, this is how I'll set in my tapers most of the time. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to fade using my same process that we discussed during our phase 4. I'm going to fade out each direction. What you're going to notice is this is actually going to preserve a lot of this area to do our final lineup into. So if you do this taper and you use this rainbow guideline, you're going to notice that you're going to have some really proportionate looking lines coming down and accentuating your taper rather than looking in the back and seeing one side's jacked up and one side's not. Okay, let's talk about the razor, and then we're going to break down some enhancement strategies. As you guys, when it comes to the razors, you're going to see a variety of different razor holders. You have your Parker styles, you have the magic ones where you sort of slide it in and out, and I don't really like those as much anymore. The one that I've become very preferential to is actually called a Turkish razor. Now, Turkish razors, for whatever reason, the exact same blade, I can put it in all these different holders. When it's in the Turkish style razor, for some reason, they always cut great. I mean, I can't even tell you. It's like a huge revelation. Mo Cuts turned me on to him. He's one of our educators, and he's just an all-around great barber. And when he kind of said that to me, and he was using it on me, it felt so smooth. It was cutting so good. I was kind of inspired by that, and I started using it too. So I actually have one from Mo Cuts, but I will leave some down below if you guys are interested in this. Y'all can't say that we left any stone unturned in this tutorial, man. So all right, we're snapping this in half. We're gonna grab out one of these blades. Level 3 blades are okay. I really think that the ghost blades are probably one of the best, but notice this. I just did it without even saying nothing. I snap off the corners. So now that I have both corners snapped off, and just a little side note, let's say that you're working on a client that has barely any room here, you can actually snap this entire blade in half, like this, and you can just use half of that blade and slide it in here. So that's what we'll do. Assuming this was a full blade, it wouldn't really change the process, but I'm just going to slide the blade. It's going to pinch it in there just like that. Now, because this is a half a blade, I'm not going to even worry about this. I'm actually going to take this out so I can show you all my examples. But that's how the Turkish razors work. And honestly, it's fantastic. So we want to hold it the right way. Some of you guys, I've seen some of you guys literally holding it with one finger over here. 2 fingers is kind of what I got used to in the beginning. And the proper way to do it is actually with 3 fingers. And I'm going to give you a couple reasons. It's going to give you a lot of advantages. So one is the 3 points of contact. I'm able to actually touch his scalp with 2 fingers, right? I can touch the scalp with 2 fingers. I'm stretching with my other hand, and I can make just a very easy maneuver with just this finger. So I can drag this razor very easily. We always want to make sure that we're putting some type of cream, shaving gel. After all the time that it took us to get here, the last thing you want to do is cut your client, right? We're going to go just right from the center now, move our way over. If you see any little tiny hairs laying over, this is a good time to get them. The razor can be just super accurate, and we're going to make a little small stroke. We don't want to make a whole bunch of strokes, because if you have an issue and you cut somebody, you're going to have a whole bunch of cuts. On this side, we're stretching the skin, we're keeping it tight, and there's a lot of times where you might even see me working with a little tiny paper towel. A lot of times I'll just keep that in this hand, my left hand, and I will wipe off an area to create an anchor to make sure that I can stretch the skin. If you can't stretch the skin, you have a very good chance of cutting them. We don't want to do that, as we talked about, after all this time. So there's going to be plenty of times where you cut people on accident, and any barber who says they don't is a damn liar, all right? So let's not do things to make that more possible. Let's actually try to do things to mitigate that from happening. So here we go, man. We're just going to come across the top. And then when we get to the left side, we already know everything's a little different on the left side. I like to come up over top of the client this way and pull it this way. You could also use a backhand stroke. I don't really think it's a great idea to use a backhand stroke there. I do like to go up against the grain. And a lot of times you'll see me use a backhand stroke to do the whole top. But Look, man, this isn't about style. I don't really care. Like, if I feel comfortable and I feel like the razor is sliding good and I feel like I can do it, sometimes I'll do it. Other times, you'll see me come right up over the top. I got my client's head right here. I'm coming right up over the top, and I'm just going to come against the grain to get that line as sharp as I possibly can. We're going to come in here. We'll do that same thing, you know, around the C-cups, and that way we get that against the grain. The C-cups, I like to kind of approach them from the side. So if I'm working on this C-cup versus this C-cup, the way that I'll typically approach this might be a little bit different. That's an extreme C there. It's actually usually more like that. All right. I'll come in from the side, kind of go with the tip of the razor. I can come in from the top, and we're good. That's going to be kind of an against the. That's most of the time going to be against the grain. Now, if I have to, I can come in, you know, in a different way. But on this side here, you're going to notice the back of the blade is going to be in your way, right? So how do I do this? A lot of times, I like to start from the bottom. I'll make a nice little cut here at the bottom, and then I'll actually reach just up and around them, and I'll use the tip of the blade to work my way down. Most of the time that's going to work. You can also use a reverse backhand stroke, and you can get in there and do a little bit of this. But whenever you're done with your razor, remember the razor and the trimmer, they work in tandem. A lot of times you're going to cut into the hairline a little bit, and that's going to cause some hair to stick out. And if that's the case, we're going to retrace our steps with the trimmer, and that's going to be the case. I should say like 90% of the time. We're probably going to retrace our steps with our trimmer. Now, if we were shaving the entire face, that's going to have to wait for another video. You don't really have to do it in these 14 steps. And I think the most important thing is you have to make sure that you have the face prepared properly before you do it. And nowadays with the electric shavers and everything too, there are some things you can do to make it easier before you pick up your razor. So we're going to have to break that one down in a different video. So that pretty much covers phase 5. We'll head into phase 6. But that's got our edge up and our razor work is done. So phase 6 is just all about detailing, and we're going to talk about some enhancements. All right, we've hammered out the blend. We've done the scissor work. We've done everything we needed to do. And now we're into our phase 6. Phase 6 is detail. You might add enhancements. You're going to look for dark spots. Pull out your cell phone. Use your cell phone camera to spot any type of problems so that you can go in there and fix them. So remember in the beginning when we talked about the faded acronym, now that would be E, evaluate. So right now you're in the E, evaluate stage, and D was just a reminder to tell you guys to deliver a world-class service to your client and make sure, all the things that we talked about then were addressed. Welcome to phase 6. Thank you guys for hanging out this long. And as you can see, this is a video that really, I hope it withstands the test of time. I hope that you guys enjoy it. And I'm not even sure if I'm breaking this up into several videos or not. But no matter what I'm doing, I really appreciate you all for being members. Shout out to all you guys. Eddie's Army, growing strong every day. So let's talk about phase 6. This should be fairly easy. We're going to use our lift, tip, and flick. And if we find any dark spots, which you're almost always going to find, and if you're not seeing any dark spots, it's time to pull out your cell phone, turn on your camera, because cameras on cell phones are going to over sharpen images. They're actually going to show you sometimes details that are not even really visible to the naked eye. So I'll pull out my cell phone, I'll spin the client, I'll see how it looks, and I'm going to use my cell phone to kind of clue me into what area actually needs to work. Now, as you develop the best barber tool you have, which is actually your eyes, you're probably going to be able to see the things that are incorrect. You're going to see the things that are giving you trouble, and you're going to be able to go right to them and use it. So we're also going to cover some shear over comb in a full other video. But using shears, using texturizing shears, using the tips of the shears, these are all different techniques that I'll use. As you see, I'm just going to lay in the tip of my shear, and I'm going to chip away at a section. I'm going to use texturizing shears the exact same way. We can go up, and we're going to do some shear over comb to really refine our blend. And I'm doing this usually during phase 6, 99% of the time, unless the client wants a full scissor haircut, which we would have already handled in phase 3. Or we would have just entirely given them a scissor haircut. You guys will actually see me do this a lot in phase 6. I'll literally take the tips of my shear and I'll break up a little section. This is just a form of texturizing. This is just going to be for like when I got a weird growth pattern and just something funny going on. And it's something I'll do a lot of times at the end of my haircut just to make my blend look perfect. It's one of the many detailing techniques that I can use in my phase 6 and make sure that I do a thorough job for the client before I hand them the mirror. Once I've identified all of my issues and I fixed all my issues, now could be a good time to put some enhancements in, and I'll show you guys a couple of different options that I really like to use. You guys know, if you've watched my videos for a long time, The majority of the time, you're probably seeing that I'm not using enhancements, but I actually do use them quite a bit. And one of my favorite ways to do it is with a product like this. This is called Kiss Express. I'm going to pour a touch into here, and then I'm going to take one of the brushes that usually comes with the clippers. I'm going to dip it in there, and you're going to notice that I'm going to be able to just kind of tap it across that line. All I'm trying to do here is create a line all the way across, and then I'm going to take my comb and I'm going to brush it down into there. What I love about this, just as a person who wears this a lot, what I love about this is it actually will last me like 2 to 3 days. 2 days, it'll be looking still really sharp, good. It'll bring out my line. I love to do it that way, and this is probably my favorite way as a person who wears it. So as you can see, my line is still pretty sharp. I actually got my hair cut on Tuesday. It was literally Tuesday morning, and it is currently Thursday morning. And this is 2 days later. I have washed my hair. I've washed my face several times. I went to the gym. I sweated, and it is still there. And that's why I really feel like using just that brush in method with the color is honestly the best for both the client and for the barber, because it's actually going to give them a line that looks good for a couple of days. Now, the other side of this is I kind of messed up the right side of my beard like last week. I got it a little bit lower. I was able to fix it with the color. And in that 2 day, 3 day time span, it's grown back some, and I can fix it now. Like as soon as this color is totally done, I could go ahead and I can fix it. So a lot of different ways you can put enhancements in, and a lot of people talk trash like it's going to blow away in the wind as soon as you put the top down on your car or as soon as you wash them. Yeah, that's true with some of them, but not all of them are created equally. And that's why you're not really going to see me doing fibers too much. That's more for like, if I really want to get a good picture, I'll do it. And you know, I'm not knocking anybody who does that. I'm just saying, like, me personally, as a person who wears enhancements and gives it to my clients, this is something that I enjoy. If the client's not into it and you're looking to get a really good picture out of it, and you just want to maybe even show the client what it could look like if you did that, that's where temptation comes in. This spray is phenomenal, y'all. I don't know why I would ever go back to an airbrush, because honestly, the stuff that when you spray on with the airbrushes, a lot of times that doesn't last very long. It lasts longer than this does. I'll give them credit there. But it's just cleaning the airbrush guns and just fighting with them and them not working. Like when you've committed to doing enhancements on your client and you got equipment that's not working, there's nothing more embarrassing than that. So even if you have this as an emergency backup, I would still recommend you get this. But what this spray does is it sprays a hell of a nice mist, and it makes the hair look really, really well defined if you don't overdo it. I'm usually using darkest brown the majority of the time. But yeah, you can put this in the beard, you can put this in the hair, and it's just going to wash right out after one wash, whereas the other one's actually going to last a few washes. And Tomb 45, the no drip spray, if I was going to use a gun, that actually worked a lot better than mixing Kiss Express. It was only a matter of time before you mix it too thick, but you can mix Kiss Express with alcohol, which is what a lot of people were doing. So you're diluting it. So when you spray it on the skin, it might be a little bit lighter, and it's definitely not going to last as long as when you put it on just directly with the color. So if I was going to use a spray enhancement gun, 100%, I would use the Tomb 45 no drip. I never had any problems with that clogging up my gun. At that point, I was just kind of moving on to doing it more the way I used to do it a long time ago. And as a matter of fact, we have somebody working here now that was my student years ago, and I used to put enhancements on just with a brush forever. I was a cosmetologist. I used to put a lot of color on with a brush, and for whatever reason, I went into all this spraying and doing all this stuff, and I kind of forgot about this. But he came here, he started working here, he started doing it, and it was looking damn good. And then he was doing it on me, and my beard was looking so perfect. I'm like, yo, I need to do this for people. So he just sort of reminded me about it, and a great barber all the same. So there's a lot of different ways that you could put enhancements on. Have fun, man. Put some colors on. And you know what? The rest of the people that talk trash about it on the internet, if it's something you enjoy and your client enjoys and they pay you for it, these other people on the internet, man, they can go themselves. I mean, really, what is it about? Is it about impressing these no-brains on the internet, or is it about building a good rapport between you and your client and providing an exceptional service? I think it's about that. So I really appreciate you guys for hanging out through the entire duration of the 6 phases. I want to point out that you can rearrange these in any way that you want. If your client asks for something short on top, if they ask for scissors and you decide, you know what, they want to leave their hair a little bit longer, maybe I'll wait on that, I'll handle the back and sides. One of the reasons why I put clipper over comb in front of the shears is because a lot of times if I do clipper over comb, on the sides, I can kind of chip away to the work that I have to do on the top. And then I really only have a very small section to do with scissors on top, and that helps reduce my time. So there might be a time where you'll exchange, clipper over comb, shear over comb, and maybe you'll do the scissors, after or before. So more or less, this is just a way that I can use to communicate it to you guys so you guys can have a good understanding of what you're doing before you go forward and you make it happen. So with that being said, this is the YBA. Shout out to you guys. You guys are a real one for being a member, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. I'm out. Peace.